As Nathan Drake crawled through the mud and slowly inched his way up a cliffside in the 13th chapter of Uncharted 4, I felt a weird emotion. Shame. If you were to list the first emotion that you'd associate with a video game, I doubt that one would ever pop up. Video games are fun and happy and sometimes dark and even thought-provoking. But an emotion like shame, being ashamed of yourself, that's one of the ones that seems like it's reserved for our real-world experiences and not as a response to the entertainment we consume. Unless maybe you're like Drake watching Stranger Things and feeling some type of way, then maybe you're feeling something at least a little shameful. She was 13, Champagne Poppy. What were you doing texting her, you guy? Despite that, as the game gave me time to reflect on recent events, the confrontation with Elena, Nate's further descent into his obsessive traits, how it almost got him killed, and how it inevitably left Nathan all alone in this moment, I couldn't help but to feel ashamed of myself, even though I didn't do anything. Linear storytelling isn't the black sheep of the games industry. On the contrary, some of the most celebrated games of all time are linear in nature, and Sony specifically has built a brand around their portfolio of games that have great linear stories. But to a good number of people, this form of storytelling does not take advantage of the interactivity which games provide. A common criticism for those who feel this way is, why don't you just watch a movie if the events are only going to play out one way? If I have no input in what's happening, what's the point of having inputs in the first place? And while I always say to each their own, I won't force my opinions on you, of course, I have my taste, you have yours, I did think this would be an interesting topic to tackle in terms of explaining why, in my eyes, interactivity is essential for these experiences, and also explaining how that interactivity, regardless of if it allows for any agency, leads to unique emotional responses and a feeling of direct involvement in the plot and the world of the game. Regardless of whether you love or hate these types of games, this is an interesting discussion to have, and I think it only makes sense to start by talking about Bioshock. The original Bioshock is a lot of things, but its main plot is a pretty interesting dissection of video games in general, but especially linear titles. For those who don't know, the twist in this game, and spoilers I guess, but the thing came out in 2007, so I think it's fair game, is that the dude who's been guiding you this whole time, Atlas, is evil, and more importantly, he's been controlling you with a specific phrase. Would you kindly? You've been programmed to obey any command that follows those words, so every time he says it, you're being manipulated. Atlas is the reason you do anything in the game. Every mission, every action you take is in efforts to complete whatever task Atlas believes you should complete. And to prove this to you, Andrew Ryan uses the command to get you to beat him to a pulp. This is such an interesting premise for a video game story because, in effect, you as the player are being controlled in an identical way. The only way for this game to not control you is if you don't play the game. For you to get to Andrew Ryan and for you to continue the game past Andrew Ryan, for you to do anything, you need to complete the objectives that the game has given to you. There's no way to circumvent that. When Andrew Ryan asks you to hit him if you want to keep going, you have to do it. This shines a direct light on what I think some people find kind of bullshit about these games, and why I find them so fascinating. In an RPG or any type of game where your choices affect the outcome, you have an amount of control on the game. But in a game where there's only one path forward at all times, the game controls you. And what that can do is force you, the player, into situations that are not designed by you, they're designed by someone else. And you have to attempt to understand, empathize, accept, or handle these situations. The game can now place you in heroic, awkward, terrifying, or morally compromised positions, and you just gotta deal with it. I would compare a well-made open story game to a car, and a well-made linear story game to a roller coaster. In a car, you have the freedom to go anywhere you want. You feel boundless, and sometimes it can even be nice to go for a drive for no reason or for something small like grabbing food. You find appreciation in the little things. In a roller coaster, the only decision you make is to strap in. After that, you are at the mercy of this piece of machinery. And the fun here comes from being taken through loop-de-loops and sharp turns and harsh drops. It's all the individual moments that give you the rush and do things that a car could never imagine of doing, but obviously you lose the freedom. A good linear game takes you through peaks and valleys and makes its moments feel exciting or enthralling, and a bad one fails to take advantage of those things and turns into one of those kiddie rides that goes up 2 meters at a 20-degree angle one time. Just like a bad open story game is less like a car and more like a unicycle. Sure, you have freedom to go wherever you want, but where are you gonna go on a unicycle? Despite you having no control in a roller coaster, it's still something that you experience. You feel that pit in your stomach as you go down a steep drop. It's happening to you, and a roller coaster would lose its effect if you weren't directly on it. A movie would be kind of like if you set an iPad next to your friend who was on a roller coaster and you watched him go through. It's a second-hand experience. Of course, you can still be happy when they're happy or laugh at their dumb faces as they shoot downwards. An emotional connection is still there, but it's definitely a different experience to be being in the roller coaster yourself. So that begs the question, how do these games make us feel like we're in the roller coaster and not just a casual observer? Well, I think it's two main things. One is just built into the identity of video games, and the other one you actually have to put a lot of effort into. These two things are aligning your achievements/challenges and level design/curated moments. There's been a good few people that have asked me why I like playing difficult games so much, which is something that I've only recently started doing, but from the outside it seems like such a bad idea for me considering I am not good at video games. I'm fighting Nightmare King Grim right now, and I fought him for like 2 hours, and I think my best run I maybe hit him like 20 times. I'm doo-doo, alright? But my answer to why I enjoy these games so much is one that's pretty similar to a lot of other people's answers. Because of the feeling I get when I win. Overcoming challenge is one of the inherent funs of video games, and even if you don't play games on super ultra hard or try playing Cuphead blindfolded or something, you're still overcoming some degree of challenge in a lot of these games. The fact of the matter is, if you sit there and do nothing, you cannot win. You personally have to do things to progress, whether it's something as grueling as beating a boss you've been stuck on for 5 hours, or something as simple as finding the solution to a short puzzle. All of this is to say, there's a built-in way to make the player feel as though the story they're being told is partially their own. In the story, a boss you're fighting might be bad-mouthing you, and you as the player think, God, this dude is so annoying, I'ma mess him up. And whether it takes you 1 try or 100, when your character defeats that adversary in the game, continuing the narrative, you've also won that scenario. The character only succeeds when you succeed, and that creates a natural link between you and the person on screen. Their victories, some of which they may barely scrape by, are also your victories. I killed Khotan Khan, I blasted the Icon of Sin, I beat the Arkham Knight, I sliced up the Sword Saint. These are moments that I'm proud of, fights that I overcame. Some easier, some harder, but all my own. And since my victories and sometimes even my defeats were in line with the characters, the story felt personal. We shared every win and every loss. Every moment that inconvenienced my character inconvenienced me as well, and it's one of the reasons that some games get away with little characterization while still having memorable characters. Because for a short time, that person and me were one and the same. And of course, this is something that's basically in all games. I'm not claiming that this is local to this type of game, but it's important to mention how games, even without dialogue or story choices, differentiate themselves from movies. The other way that I mentioned you can make linear games a personal experience is through level design and curated moments, and I think here we need to talk more about Uncharted. Especially since, in my eyes, this is the linear game franchise. If I were to pick a single franchise to dissect for this topic, it has to be this one. I was watching a video by Game Maker's Toolkit, and it was talking about how a level designer at Naughty Dog mentioned how something as small as introducing low ceilings to a level could have a subtle effect on the player. Placing Nate underneath massive rocks or inside of a dark, damp cave makes the player feel claustrophobic and trapped. And getting out of those places leads to a small sense of relief. It's like a small victory, and even though you might not be hyper aware of the game doing that, small things like this in level design can be paramount to a game's atmosphere and making you feel like you're walking in Nate's shoes. It basically finds a way to personalize an experience that's universal for all players. On top of that, even more unique level design or set pieces or crazy moments can create a much more obvious and often necessary connection for this effect. Some of my favorite moments and levels come from Uncharted 3, the first of which being the boat escape scene. While there's only one path forward on your road to escaping this sinking vessel, it's still up to you to find that path as the urgency of the situation rings on in the background represented by the rising water. Clambering up a wall that's now shooting straight up, grasping onto doors for dear life, going left on an elevator. The game kind of shifts off axis and asks you to readjust how you look at the levels as your impending doom is laid out behind you. You're forced to move from wall to ceiling to floor as the boat turns underneath you. The game uses small twists on its own mechanics or norms to razzle the player and get them on uneven footing. It's basically shifting under your feet the same way that the boat is under Nate's, and it makes this escape set piece feel so much more genuine and like I'm actually feeling the effects of what's happening in the game world through my controller. The airplane scene, climbing up this yellow mesh feels like there's a lot more resistance as you're forced to slowly reach up instead of your typical monkeying around. As you fight, debris begins flying around and your trusty cover system is no longer reliable since the boxes keep getting yeeted out into the desert. The ground starts to sway and makes aiming a lot more difficult. In both of these scenes, my actual gameplay challenges are synced up with what's happening in the story. I'm struggling to adjust to these scenarios, and I feel like Nathan and I are both actually in that situation and miraculously escaped. These moments always made me feel like the adventure is mine just as much as it is his, meaning the story beats feel personal to me. I'm not watching him with an iPad, I'm on the roller coaster with him, and to perfectly demonstrate even further how this leads to story moments that you could never get in a movie, while I could continue on either of these scenes, I would like to direct your attention instead to Uncharted 4 and the opening of this video. At the beginning of Uncharted 4, Nate lies to Elena about where he is, and as a viewer, you yell at him to be honest with his wife. Come on, dude. I get that you think this could be dangerous, and I respect you for not wanting to go until you believed your brother was in serious trouble, and I get you not wanting to put her in harm's way, but don't lie to your wife, damn it. Especially when that wife is Elena, who we all know is just as capable as Nate himself. I think most people are disappointed with Nate here, and throughout the early sections of the journey, the fact that Nate and by proxy you are lying to Elena is constantly popping up in your head. As the game progresses and gets crazier, that thought becomes dimmer and dimmer, and then you get to this. Your adventure rises to a crescendo. You start getting shot at a public market, and then you run around, hop into a jeep, and start smashing throughout the entire city. You're being chased by this unhinged vehicle with heavy artillery. You weave your way around and spot Sam. You jump off your car last second and latch onto a vehicle. Whoa, you just got past that boat. My heart jumped out of my chest when I played this for the first time. You slide around shooting enemies, manage to pull yourself up, hop between vehicles, destroying everyone else's. You leap into a car and start smashing into dudes on motorbikes, and you crash and you shoot and pull your way out of the burning wreckage. Hop yourself onto Sam's motorbike, let him lead you through these tight corners and sharp turns as you unleash hell onto this vehicle, and it begins to chip away and it flips all the way over and lands right at your feet. This has to be one of the most fun and intense scenes in a game ever, and you're actually playing through it and jumping and driving around, and if you tell me that you thought about Elena once during this section, you are lying to my face. Just like Nate, my hesitancy about this mission and the pain it could bring Elena have entirely evaporated as the rush of adventure surges through me and it becomes all I can think about, and at that exact moment, Naughty Dog says, "Hey, you remember her?" This moment drops the hammer down on me as much as it does Nathan. The game was able to make me feel how he felt so effectively and so entirely that when I saw Elena in that room, I felt like I had let her down. Not this guy. Me. And ultimately, after we left and ran into trouble and Nate got marooned on an island, I couldn't help but to feel, above all else, shame. There's a lot to talk about with linear storytelling and where it could go wrong. I'm sure some people are probably thinking about ludonarrative dissonance, which is, although an overused term, still relevant to the discussion at hand, but while I might tackle that in a future video, I think that ultimately, linear storytelling contains the capacity to make us feel a wider range of emotions more deeply by putting us directly into high-energy, emotionally charged, curated scenes and events, and connecting us to the main character through gameplay and narrative parallels. Any game, whether it gives you choices or not, is able to elicit strong emotional responses in different ways, of course. But linear games have the benefit of being able to use their structure to concentrate those emotions through both subtle and obvious techniques, much like the concentrated emotional response of dropping down a roller coaster. Through linear games, I felt things that I didn't think were possible to feel from anything that wasn't a real-life personal experience, and I think that's a powerful thing to have in media. Being able to walk a mile in someone else's shoes is a concept that can lead to so many amazing results, not just as a means for pure entertainment, but even to help develop an understanding of something that might be foreign to us. So while I don't expect people who hate linear games to be turned around by this video, I hope at the very least I explained why to people like me, they're really special.